Sophia Bennett stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, her hands trembling as she adjusted the delicate veil that cascaded down her back. The dress was more expensive than anything she had ever worn, a creation of silk and lace that made her look like a princess from a fairy tale. But fairy tales didn't come with contracts and cold business arrangements. They didn't come with the hollow feeling that had settled in her chest since the moment her father had begged her to accept Vincent Harrington's proposal. The Harrington name carried weight in the city. Vincent's real estate empire stretched across 3 states, and his reputation as a shrewd businessman was matched only by whispers about his ice-cold heart. At 32, he had never been seriously linked to anyone, preferring boardrooms to ballrooms. When he approached her father with an offer to invest in the struggling Bennett's bakery in exchange for Sophia's hand in marriage, it had seemed like divine intervention. Her father's business was drowning in debt, and her mother's medical bills were piling higher each month. Sophia had looked into her father's desperate eyes and said yes, before she even met her future husband. A stranger at the altar, the ceremony had been a blur of camera flashes and polite applause. Vincent had looked devastatingly handsome in his tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his green eyes unreadable as he slipped the platinum band onto her finger. His lips had barely brushed hers during their first kiss as husband and wife, a gesture so brief and impersonal it might as well have been a handshake. The reception followed the same script, with Vincent playing the role of attentive groom with mechanical precision. He smiled at the right moments, made the expected toasts, and guided her through their first dance with the efficiency of someone checking items off a list. Now, in the penthouse suite of the city's most exclusive hotel, the performance was over. Sophia heard the door to the bedroom open and close. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped out of the bathroom, still wearing her wedding dress because she couldn't reach the tiny buttons that ran down her spine. Vincent stood by the window, his back to her, already loosening his tie with sharp, irritated movements. The city lights glittered behind him like a sea of fallen stars. Words that cut like glass. "You can call the maid to help you with the dress," Vincent said without turning around. His voice was flat, businesslike, as if he were addressing an assistant rather than his bride. "She's on call tonight." Sophia's throat tightened. "I thought maybe you could help me." The words came out softer than she intended, almost a whisper. Vincent turned slowly, and the look he gave her made her blood run cold. His handsome features might as well have been carved from marble for all the warmth they showed. He walked toward her with measured steps, each one echoing in the vast suite. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. Instead, he simply stood there, studying her with those calculating green eyes. "Let's establish something right now," Vincent said, his tone cutting through the space between them like a blade. "This marriage is a transaction. Your family needed money. I needed a wife to satisfy my grandfather's requirements for the trust fund. That's the beginning and end of our relationship." Sophia felt the words like physical blows. She had known the arrangement was practical. Some foolish part of her had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real. That hope crumbled to dust as Vincent continued speaking. "The contract written in ice, you'll have your own room in my home." He continued, turning away from her again to pour himself a drink from the sweets bar. "We'll attend social functions together as needed. You'll play the role of my wife in public. But don't confuse that performance with reality." "Vincent, I know this started as an arrangement, but we're married now," Sophia said, hating how her voice shook. "Can't we at least try to be friends? To get to know each other?" He took a slow sip of his whiskey before responding. When he looked at her again, his expression was almost pitying, which somehow hurt worse than his anger would have. "I don't need friends. I have business partners and employees. You fall somewhere between the two." The casual cruelty of his words stole the breath from her lungs. Sophia had faced hardship before. She had worked 2 jobs to help support her family, had sacrificed her own dreams of art school to keep the bakery afloat. But nothing had prepared her for this particular kind of pain. The agony of being dismissed so completely by the man who now held legal claim to her life. "Alone in paradise, the maid will be here in 5 minutes to help you," Vincent said, glancing at his expensive watch. "I'm going to sleep in the suite next door. Tomorrow we'll fly to the Maldives for appearances." We're expected to have a honeymoon. You'll have your own villa. Of course I will, Sophia whispered, more to herself than to him. Vincent paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For just a moment, something flickered across his face, an emotion too quick to catch. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar cold mask. This doesn't have to be difficult, Sophia. Accept what this is, and we'll coexist peacefully. Try to make it something it's not, and you'll only hurt yourself. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the enormous suite. Sophia stood frozen in her wedding dress. Surrounded by champagne bottles she hadn't opened, and rose petals scattered across surfaces she would never touch. The diamond on her finger caught the light, sparkling mockingly. She thought about her parents, about how relieved and grateful they had been. She thought about the contract she had signed, binding her to this man for at least 2 years. She thought about the girl she had been just this morning, nervous but hopeful, and felt a profound sense of loss for that innocent version of herself. When the maid arrived, professional and silent, Sophia let herself be undressed and helped into a silk nightgown she would sleep in alone. She climbed into the massive bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and finally allowed the tears to come. They flowed silently down her cheeks as the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks beyond the window. She cried for her shattered dignity, for the loneliness that stretched ahead of her, and for the realization that she had sold not just her hand in marriage, but pieces of her soul to a man who saw her as nothing more than a line item in a contract. Tomorrow the sun would rise on her new life as Vincent Harrington's wife, and she would have to find the strength to survive it. 3 months had passed since. The wedding night that shattered Sophia's heart into 1,000 pieces. The Harrington estate had become her beautiful prison, sprawling mansion with 12 bedrooms, manicured gardens, and enough space for 2 people to avoid each other completely. Vincent kept his promise with ruthless efficiency. They lived separate lives under the same roof, crossing paths only when absolutely necessary. Breakfast was a silent affair, where he read financial reports while she pushed food around her plate. Dinner happened in his study or not at all, with Vincent working late most nights. Sophia had her own wing of the house, decorated in soft creams and pale blues that felt nothing like home. The staff was polite but distant, clearly instructed to maintain professional boundaries. Only Martha, the elderly housekeeper who had worked for the Harrington family for 30 years, showed her any real warmth. Martha would bring her tea in the afternoons and sit with her in the garden, sharing stories about when Vincent was a boy, before something turned his heart to stone, finding light in darkness despite the loneliness. Sophia refused to become a ghost in her own life. She began volunteering at a children's hospital 3 days a week, reading stories and organizing art projects. The joy on those young faces reminded her that goodness still existed in the world. She also started baking again, something she hadn't done since leaving her family's bakery. The kitchen staff was surprised at first when she appeared in their domain, but soon they welcomed her experiments. Fresh bread, delicate pastries, and cookies filled the mansion with warmth and sweetness that had been absent before. One evening, Vincent came home earlier than usual and stopped in the hallway, drawn by an unfamiliar scent. He followed it to the kitchen where Sophia was pulling a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven. Flour dusted across her cheek, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She looked up, startled to see him there. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them crackled with a tension that hadn't existed before. "What are you doing?" Vincent asked, his tone less harsh than usual, more curious. "Baking," Sophia replied simply, setting down the tray. "I used to do this every morning at my family's bakery. I miss it." Vincent's jaw tightened at the mention of her family, the reason they were bound together. He turned to leave, but then paused. "They smell good," he said quietly, almost reluctantly, before disappearing down the hallway, the charity Galetha. Annual Harrington Foundation Charity Gala arrived like a storm on the calendar. It was the biggest social event of the season, and Vincent's assistant had made it clear that Sophia's presence and performance were mandatory. A team of stylists arrived at the mansion to transform her into the perfect billionaire's wife. They dressed her in a stunning emerald gown that hugged her curves and brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Diamond earrings that cost more than her childhood home glittered at her ears. When Sophia descended the grand staircase, Vincent was waiting in the foyer, devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. His eyes swept over her, and for the first time since their wedding night, she saw something flicker in those green depths. Appreciation, desire, something human beneath the ice. But it vanished so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. "You look appropriate," he said. Offering his arm with mechanical courtesy, the gala was held in a historic mansion converted into an event space. With crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and hundreds of the city's elite mingling beneath soaring ceilings. Vincent transformed the moment they entered, becoming charming and attentive, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. Sophia played her part, smiling until her face ached, making small talk with people whose jewelry could feed a small country, the spark of jealousy halfway through the evening. While Vincent was engaged in conversation with potential investors, a man approached Sophia at the champagne table. He was younger than Vincent, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that reached all the way to his face. "You must be the famous Sophia Harrington," he said, his tone friendly and genuine. "I'm Lucas Chen. I run a nonprofit that provides arts education to underprivileged children." Sophia's face lit up with real enthusiasm for the first time that evening. "That sounds wonderful. I've been volunteering at Children's Memorial Hospital doing art projects with the patients." Fell into easy conversation, discussing their shared passion for helping children through creativity. Lucas made her laugh with stories about his students, and Sophia found herself relaxing, forgetting for a moment the performance she was supposed to be maintaining. She didn't notice Vincent watching them from across the room, his conversation with the investors forgotten, his eyes tracking every smile she gave to another man. When Lucas gently touched her arm while laughing at something she said, he crossed the room with predatory grace, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes blazing with something dark and dangerous. "Darling," he said, the endearment sounding more like a warning, his arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her firmly against his side. "I've been looking for you." Confrontation in the shadows, Vincent. "This is Lucas Chen," Sophia began, but Vincent cut her off. "I know who he is," Vincent said coldly, extending his hand for a brief, aggressive handshake. "Chen, I've heard about your little nonprofit. Admirable work, I'm sure." The dismissal in his tone was unmistakable. Lucas smiled politely, but Sophia could see the confusion in his eyes. "It was lovely meeting you, Sophia," Lucas said, backing away from the obvious tension. "Perhaps we can continue this conversation another time." The moment Lucas was gone, Vincent's grip on her waist tightened almost painfully. "We're leaving," he said through gritted teeth. "The gala isn't over," Sophia protested, trying to pull away. "Now." The single word carried the weight of a command. He practically dragged her through the crowd, maintaining his pleasant expression while his fingers dug into her side. They reached the limousine and Vincent opened the door with barely controlled violence. Once they were inside the privacy of the car, the facade crumbled. "What the hell was that?" Vincent demanded, his voice low and furious. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. "What was what?" "I was having a conversation. We were flirting," he accused, his eyes flashing with anger, laughing and touching him like some desperate woman looking for attention. The accusation was so unfair, so hypocritical, that Sophia felt her own anger rise to match his. "How dare you," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You treat me like I don't exist. You've made it perfectly clear that I'm nothing but a business arrangement to you. And now you're angry because someone showed me basic human kindness?" Cracks in the ice, Vincent's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "You're my wife. You wear my name. I won't have you making a fool of me by throwing yourself at other men. Making a fool of you?" Sophia laughed bitterly. "You've been making a fool of me since our wedding night. You humiliate me every single day with your coldness and contempt. At least Lucas treated me like a person instead of a piece of furniture." Something in Vincent's expression shifted. The anger was still there, but beneath it, Sophia glimpsed something else. Pain, confusion, and something that looked almost like fear. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, his jaw working as he struggled with words that wouldn't come. The limousine pulled up to the mansion. Vincent exited quickly, striding toward the house without waiting for her. Sophia followed more slowly, her heart pounding, her mind reeling from the confrontation. She had never seen Vincent lose control before, had never seen anything crack, that perfect icy exterior. Midnight revelation. Sophia went straight to her room, peeling off the expensive gown and jewelry, scrubbing away the makeup until her face was bare and raw. She put on comfortable pajamas and tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. They paused, and she held her breath, wondering if Vincent would knock. But after a long moment, the footsteps retreated, unable to sleep. Sophia wandered down to the kitchen, planning to make herself tea. She stopped in the doorway, surprised to find Vincent sitting at the kitchen island in the darkness, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up when she entered, and in the dim light, she saw something in his face she had never seen before. Vulnerability. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The words seeming to cost him something, Sophia moved carefully into the room, as if approaching a wounded animal. "For what specifically?" "There's quite a list to choose from." He almost smiled at that, a ghost of humor flickering across his features. "For tonight?" "For overreacting." He took a drink, gathering courage. "My last relationship ended badly. She was with me for my money, and when she found someone richer, she left. Made sure everyone knew I was a fool who couldn't see what was right in front of him." The confession hung in the air between them. Sophia sat down across from him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a heartless villain, but a man who had been hurt and had armored himself against ever feeling that pain again. "So you decided never to let anyone close enough to hurt you again," she said softly. "Something like that," Vincent admitted. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Sophia saw the walls he had built so carefully beginning to crack. "But tonight, when I saw you with him, laughing the way you never laugh with me, I felt something I didn't expect to feel. I was jealous, Sophia. And I have no right to be jealous of a woman I've treated like a stranger." The admission shocked them both. Sophia's heart raced as she processed his words. This was more than Vincent had shared in their entire marriage combined. "You could have me laugh with you," she said carefully. "You could have more than a cold business arrangement if you were willing to try." Vincent looked down at his glass, his expression tormented. "I don't know if I remember how to try anymore. I've been frozen for so long." Sophia reached across the island and gently placed her hand over his. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "Then maybe it's time to thaw," she whispered. Dawn broke over the Harrington estate with unusual softness, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Sophia woke in her bed with the memory of last night's kitchen conversation wrapped around her heart like a fragile promise. Vincent had opened a door, just a crack, and for the first time since their wedding, she had glimpsed the man beneath the armor. But as the morning light strengthened, so did her doubts. How many times could she let hope flicker to life, only to watch it die again? She dressed simply in jeans and a cream sweater, pulling her dark hair into a loose braid. When she descended to breakfast, her heart sank. Vincent sat at the table in his usual spot, dressed in one of his expensive suits, his attention fixed on his tablet. The walls were back up, higher and thicker than before. He didn't look up when she entered. It was as if their midnight conversation had never happened, as if he had never admitted to jealousy or vulnerability. "Good morning," Sophia said quietly. Pouring herself coffee. "Morning," Vincent replied without lifting his eyes from the screen. "I have meetings all day." "Don't wait up for dinner." The dismissal was clear. Sophia felt something inside her chest crack. Not with the sharp pain of their wedding night, but with a deeper, more dangerous fracture. This was worse than his initial cruelty, because now she knew what lived beneath his coldness. She knew he was capable of feeling, of caring, but he chose not to. He chose to keep hurting her rather than risk being hurt himself. The decision to leave 2 weeks passed in the same frozen pattern. Vincent worked 16-hour days, came home late, and avoided her completely. The brief thaw had frozen over again, leaving Sophia more isolated than ever. She threw herself into her volunteer work at the hospital, spending longer hours with the children, letting their innocent laughter fill the empty spaces in her heart. But every night, she returned to the mansion that felt more like a mausoleum, and something inside her began to shift. One evening, Martha found her crying in the garden, surrounded by roses that bloomed without anyone to appreciate their beauty. The elderly housekeeper sat beside her on the stone bench, wrapping a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Child, you can't keep living like this," Martha said gently. "You're fading away like a flower without sun." "I made a promise," Sophia whispered. "My family needed help. The contract says 2 years." Martha shook her head. "Some promises break us when we try to keep them. Your family wouldn't want you to destroy yourself for their sake. I've watched you these past months, bringing light into this cold house with your baking and your kindness. But you can't pour from an empty cup, sweetheart." That night, Sophia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Martha's words echoing in her mind. She thought about her life, about the woman she used to be before she became Mrs. Vincent Harrington. She had been strong once, determined, full of dreams. When had she accepted this half-life of shadows and silence? The contract had 18 months remaining, but suddenly those months stretched before her like a prison sentence. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't keep breaking herself against the wall of Vincent's indifference. Breaking point the next morning, Sophia began to pack. She moved quietly through her room, folding clothes and gathering the few possessions that actually belonged to her rather than to her role as Vincent's wife. She left behind the designer dresses, the expensive jewelry, anything that carried the weight of obligation. She kept only what was truly hers, what she had brought from her old life or created with her own hands. She was placing her suitcase by the door when Vincent appeared in the hallway. He had come home early for once, and the sight of her luggage stopped him cold. His face went pale beneath his tan. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Leaving," Sophia said simply. She was surprised by how calm she felt, how clear her decision was. "I can't do this anymore, Vincent. I can't live in this beautiful cage pretending that I'm not slowly dying inside." "You have a contract," Vincent said, and she heard the desperation beneath his attempt at authority. "You agreed to 2 years? Then sue me," Sophia replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "Take back every penny you gave my family. I'll work the rest of my life to pay you back if I have to. But I won't stay here and let you turn me into a ghost." Vincent moved toward her, his hand reaching out as if to grab her arm, then falling uselessly to his side. "You can't just leave." "Watch me," Sophia said, picking up her suitcase. "You made it clear on our wedding night that I meant nothing to you. You've spent every day since then proving it. I was foolish enough to hope that might change. But I'm done hoping. I'm done waiting for scraps of humanity from a man who's determined to stay frozen." She walked past him toward the stairs, and Vincent followed, his footsteps echoing in the grand hallway. "Sophia, wait. That night in the kitchen, I told you things. I opened up to you." Sophia paused on the landing, turning to look up at him. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained steady. "And then you slammed the door shut again, even harder than before. You showed me that you're capable of feeling, Vincent, which makes it so much worse. You choose this coldness. You choose to hurt me every single day because you're too afraid to risk anything yourself." The pursuit begins. Sophia left the Harrington mansion with only her suitcase and her dignity. She moved into a tiny studio apartment across town, a place with peeling paint and noisy neighbors, but blessed freedom. She picked up extra shifts at the hospital and got a part-time job at a local bakery, kneading dough and decorating cakes. The work was hard, her hands ached, and money was tight, but she could breathe again. She could laugh without feeling guilty. She could be herself without wondering if she was performing correctly. For Vincent, Sophia's departure was an earthquake that shattered the carefully constructed world he had built. He came home that first night to a mansion that felt emptier than it ever had before. Her absence was everywhere, in the kitchen that no longer smelled of fresh baking, in the garden where no one sat reading in the afternoon sun, in the silence that was no longer peaceful, but suffocating. He tried to work, burying himself in contracts and negotiations, but found himself staring at spreadsheets without seeing the numbers. He drove past her apartment building late at night, seeing the light in her window and wondering what she was doing, if she was happier without him. The answer terrified him because he suspected it was yes. Martha watched him with knowing eyes. You're going to lose her completely if you don't do something, she said one morning when she found him standing in the kitchen where they'd had their midnight conversation, holding one of the coffee mugs Sophia used to favor. She's better off without me, Vincent said. But the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. That's not for you to decide, Martha replied firmly. That boy you used to be, the one who believed in love before that awful woman broke your heart. He's still in there somewhere. Sophia saw him. That's why it hurts her so much that you keep hiding him away. The grand gesture Vincent spent sleepless nights wrestling with himself, with the fear that had controlled him for so long. He thought about his last relationship, about how the betrayal had felt like dying. But he also thought about Sophia, about her kindness and strength, about the way she had never asked him for anything except basic human decency. She wasn't his ex. She had never been motivated by money or status. She had married him to save her family. And then she had tried, against all odds, to build something real 3 weeks after Sophia left. Vincent showed up at the children's hospital during her volunteer shift. She was in the playroom, surrounded by kids, her face lit up with genuine joy as she helped a little girl paint a rainbow. She looked different than she had in his house, more alive, more herself. When she saw him standing in the doorway, the joy drained from her face, replaced by wariness. "Can we talk?" Vincent asked quietly. Sophia glanced at the children, then at the nurse supervisor, who nodded encouragingly. She led Vincent to a small courtyard outside, crossing her arms protectively across her chest. "What do you want, Vincent? If you're here about the money, I told you I'll pay you back." "I don't want the money," Vincent said. He looked different too, less polished than usual, with shadows under his eyes and a vulnerability in his posture. "I want to tell you that you were right about everything. I did choose to stay frozen. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I hurt the one person who never deserved it." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Why are you telling me this now?" "What changed?" "You left," Vincent said simply. "And I realized that the pain I was so afraid of, the vulnerability I was trying to avoid, it found me anyway. Losing you hurts worse than anything my ex ever did to me. Because you weren't just a wife on paper, Sophia. You were bringing life back into my world, and I was too blind and scared to see it." Vincent took a step closer, and Sophia didn't back away. "I've been such a fool," he continued, his voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting myself, but I was just building a prison. And the worst part is that I locked you in there with me. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." "Vincent," Sophia whispered, her defenses crumbling despite her best efforts to maintain them. "I'm not asking you to come back," Vincent said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that, but I need you to know that I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. Whether you give me another chance or not, I'm going to become the man who deserved you in the first place. I'm starting therapy. I'm learning to trust again. I'm tearing down those walls brick by brick." Sophia wiped at her tears, her heart aching with a confusion of emotions. "You hurt me so deeply, Vincent. You made me feel worthless." "I know," he said, and his own eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And I will regret that for the rest of my life. You are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You walked into my frozen world and started a thaw I was too stubborn to appreciate. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that I can change." "How do I know this isn't temporary?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling. "How do I know you won't let me back in just to freeze me out again?" Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, worn and filled with his handwriting. He handed it to her. "I've been writing," he said, "every day since you left. Writing about my fears, my regrets, the moments I remember with you. My therapist suggested it, and it's helping me understand myself. I want you to have this because I want you to see that this change is real." The path forward, Sophia took the notebook with shaking hands, flipping through pages filled with raw, honest words. She saw her name over and over, saw descriptions of moments she thought he hadn't noticed, saw admissions of feelings she never knew he had. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she read his pain and his growth. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said honestly, closing the notebook and holding it against her chest. "You broke something in me, Vincent. It's going to take more than pretty words to fix it. "I know," Vincent said, and there was acceptance in his voice rather than demand. "So let me earn it back. Let me court you properly this time. Let me take you to dinner not as an obligation, but because I want to know everything about you. Let me prove that I can be the man who cherishes you the way you deserve." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the hope and fear mixed together. She thought about the future, about what forgiveness might look like, about whether broken things could ever be truly mended. "One dinner," she said finally, "and we take things slow. No promises, no pressure. You show me through actions, not words, that you've really changed." Vincent's face transformed with a smile so genuine and relieved that Sophia's breath caught. This was the man Martha had told her about, the one who existed before pain turned him to ice. "One dinner," he agreed. "And I promise you, Sophia, I will spend however long it takes proving that I'm worth a second chance. Even if it takes the rest of my life, I will chase you until you believe that you're not just wanted, but treasured." As Sophia watched him walk away, hope bloomed cautiously in her heart. She didn't know if they could overcome what had happened, if love could grow in soil that had been so poisoned. But for the first time since her wedding night, she felt like maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. Maybe the man who had destroyed her on their wedding night could become the man who would spend his life building her back up. Only time would tell, but now at least they had a chance. And sometimes, a chance is where the greatest love stories begin.